going to take a sip of water and then read to you a little bit. So I'll read from the Ghana section. I was just asked to participate in this blog, maybe some of you know it, called My Book, the Movie, where you're invited to imagine who you would cast in the roles of, you know, it's a little unsettling when it's sort of a memoir. Like, I'm also a character in this book, journeying to find home somewhere, so I'm being asked to think, who would play me? But anyway, the couple that I'm going to read about was an elderly couple who are expats who've been living in Ghana since the late 50s. And if I could have cast them, I would have liked to resurrect Ossie Davis from the grave and cast him alongside his wife, Ruby Dee. That's who I'd like you to imagine for something of their companionship and their humor, and also their grace. Okay. I should say that in the late 50s, in 1957, Ghana became, after Sudan, the first African nation to elect a black leader. And so it became this sort of lodestar for like a golden and voguish place for a lot of black Americans who saw this as sort of a new opportunity for a place of freedom where, you know, it was newly independent from colonial rule. And this was the time when they moved there, hoping to return and kind of become African. And what they found was a little more complex. So I showed up at their house to ask them about home. In their sunflower yellow kitchen, Mary Ellen handed me a bottle of Fanta and apologized for not having a drinking glass to offer me. "We've only got 2 and they're both dirty," she said. "John wouldn't let me buy new ones when the others broke. We can't have our possessions possessing us. That's what he says, and I'm more or less of the same mind. The more we have, the more we think we should have. That's what our American culture of rugged individualism nurtures, the compulsion to possess. Don't you think, Emily?" Yes, I agreed, though I was embarrassed to admit then just how much shopping I'd been doing in Accra. Overtaken by a hunger for color, I felt compelled to buy this fertility fetish, these gold earrings, this pretty cloth with the bird print named Money Flies. I was losing track of how many CDs I'd spent in the markets, at the trade fair, and at the antiquities dealer. Each night I draped my cloth collection on the bed so the color would be near my skin. The gold of the kente, the blue-black indigo, the purple from Mali. I'd had to buy another suitcase, in fact, to haul my mounting load to Chez Lian, the hotel in Osu, where I'd taken a dark little room and gotten into a battle with the man at the front desk over light bulbs. Only one of the room's 4 lamps had a light bulb, strong enough to illuminate the clouds of mosquitoes, but not strong enough to read by. The man was exasperated when I asked for more bulbs. "Light, light. How much light can this woman need?" If I wanted to hear such complaints, I should have stayed at home in the company of my miserable wives. "Anyway," Mary Ellen said as she flicked the omelet she was cooking for her husband's dinner, "we've got to be able to travel light when we leave." "You're planning to leave Ghana?" I asked, surprised. Mary Ellen dropped her voice. "I want to," she said. "Can I ask why?" She spoke under her breath, as if concerned about John overhearing. "Water shortages, public urination, potholes, con artists in the market giving us Obruni prices, cutting 2 yards of cloth when you've paid for 3. The power is more off than on, and oh, the litter." In spite of herself, her voice grew louder. "Accra is drowning in those plastic bags they call rubbers. It wears on you. Don't get me wrong, Emily, it's a lovely little country. There were plenty of rich natural resources," she went on, "and land producing 2 to 3 crops a year. But with all its timber, bauxite, cocoa, and gold, there was still so much poverty to lament. Half the kids aren't even in school," she said. "I used to think if only we could import several thousand industrious and creative take-charge black Americans to build this nation." By now she was almost shouting, "We've certainly had enough experience building America." Mary Ellen's idea that African Americans could save Ghana struck me as patronizing, but I also knew she was speaking out of a Pan-Africanist tradition. If she came here believing it was her destiny to help build the nation, it was in large part because when Nkrumah came to power, he had invited skilled Black Americans to do just that. What about the AAAG, I asked, about the African American Association of Ghana, housed at the W.E.B. Du Bois Memorial Center for Pan-African Culture on Cantonments Road? Of all the African Americans to emigrate to Ghana, Du Bois was the most esteemed. The founder of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was 93 years old when he renounced his U.S. passport for Ghanaian citizenship. With one foot in the grave and the other planted at last on African soil, he devoted his final days to penning the Encyclopedia Africana, a sweeping compendium of the Black world that furthered his long quest to attain a Black Zion. Decades before, while in Paris to organize the Pan-African Congress of 1919, he announced that the African movement must mean to us what the Zionist movement must mean to the Jews. The encyclopedia was a tireless attempt to define Black peoplehood, so it was no wonder that the center in Accra, where Du Bois was buried, was a gathering place for returnees. "Are you a member?" I asked Mary Ellen. "I was at one point," Mary Ellen sighed, "but it's a potluck group, not an activist organization. Its practices are even more disappointing than its aims." She turned off the flame under the frying pan. "Why should it be an activist organization?" I asked. There was a part of me that thought a potluck group sounded more fun, especially for someone like Mary Ellen, who cooked eggs for dinner and had only 2 drinking glasses. The fact that so many of us came to Ghana to build a new home speaks of a sense of purpose that should form the basis for a strong and unified group. Yet we can't seem to bring our disparate talents together, she complained. Of course, everyday survival in Ghana takes an incredible amount of energy, but we have to find a way to work together with all our differences for the benefit of us all. Mary Ellen reached to the shelf above the stove, pulled down a chipped plate, and inspected it for ants. She continued, "At best, the AAAG should be operating like one of the Lebanese merchant associations, providing business liaisons and contacts for expats and also services for visiting brothers and sisters like you, meeting folks at the airport, organizing tours, setting up accommodations. Instead, it's splintered into factions. Some members accepted backing for the Du Bois Center from the U.S. government, and others thought it was dirty money, the very thing they were distancing themselves from by coming to Ghana in the first place." I was about to ask Mary Ellen if she could explain what she meant to distance herself from by coming here, when a heavy thud sounded from the back room, like a duffel bag hitting the floor. "What are you 2 niggers talking about?" slurred a loud voice. "Watch your mouth, John Ray," Mary Ellen called. "We've got company. Use good English." "I ain't talking English, woman," he yelled. "This here is my house. I'm talking nigganese." Their dog Tut began to bark. "This is our house," Mary Ellen shouted back like a woman who could dish it as well as she could take it. She slid the omelet onto the plate. "Now mind your manners and come and eat your dinner before I burn it to spite you." She bent over and swiped the yapping puppy on his wet nose. Whimpering, the puppy retreated. "Should I leave?" I asked, even though I didn't want to. Things were starting to get interesting. "No, dear, please stay," Mary Ellen said. "You'll see. He'll be so glad to have a visitor from home." John shuffled into the kitchen. He was tall and thin as a pencil and missing some upper teeth, but with his prominent cheekbones and rakish grin, you could still see the devilishly handsome man he must have been. An ascot and a smoking jacket would have seemed more fitting than the pillowed brown bathrobe he wore. Immediately, he spotted my digital camera. "Leica?" he asked. I nodded. He gestured for me to hand it to him, and I did. "Look out," Mary Ellen warned. "You'll be leaving here without it." John squinted at the viewing screen, scrolling back through the shots I'd snapped, as if to discover what I was looking for. He passed my pictures of the conical 8-foot termite hills, the malnourished child with her hair gone patchy and blonde from the disease kwashiorkor, the kora player with his head thrown back in song, and the Homowo festival, where the red-robed chief and his entourage posed under umbrellas decorated with skulls. Finally, John paused at a picture of a seller at Makala Market, carrying a tin basin of ground nuts arranged in a flawless pyramid on her head. Not bad, he said. Thanks, I said, eager for his praise. This one's better. He scrutinized a picture of a very unofficial-looking hand-painted sign, birth and death, kindly pass to the next gate. It had something to do with birth and death certificates. I know where that is, Mary Ellen said, peeking over John's shoulder. That's just outside the American consulate. If you pass by there, Emily, then you've seen the lines. Throngs of Ghanaians are plotting for travel documents to enter the gates of the land of opportunity, not to mention the brain drain. Whether they're educated or not, your average Ghanaian's got serious get-out-of-Ghana genes. They make no contribution to their nation's growth, but can't stop talking about what's wrong with Ghana. They're definitely not foot soldiers. So you see, we're not the only ones who want to leave. No one wants to stay here. I'm not going anywhere but the grave, John objected. I'm an old man. Oh, hush, you're going to the living room to eat these eggs. And that's where you're going. Come, Emily, let's sit. We moved to the living room where the walls were streaked with water stains from past rainy seasons. It smelled of mildew and bug spray. A small TV rested on a metal stand in the corner, its rabbit ears rigged with tinfoil. Later on, Mary Ellen and I would watch one of her stories, a South African soap opera called Generations, whose twisted plot I could barely follow through the TV's screen of snow. But for now, my attention was caught by a few of John's black and white prints hanging above a worn couch. He was reluctant to tell me about his work and confessed that most of his pictures were stored away in a trunk, probably growing mold. Whether or not he was still active as a photographer, he was inspired by my camera. I'll give you $200 for it, he offered. It's not for sale, I said, I'm sorry. $220, final offer. The camera had cost me $500, half my rent. No way, I said. John looked disgusted, and I wished I could let go of my camera so easily, that I could see it for the possession it was and offer it freely, but it was too important to me. I wanted to give Mary Ellen and him something else. I realized too late that I'd been ungracious to show up empty-handed. Here, I offered lamely, handing John a commemorative issue of Time magazine with Michael Jackson on the cover. The king of pop had died just before I left the States. It was the worst gift I could have given. Just look what America did to this little brother's face, John spat, tossing the magazine aside like a dirty tissue. And you wonder why we left that twisted pisshole of a country. He did that to himself, John, said Mary Ellen. He did that to be loved, John corrected her. The women here bleach their faces too. They look like cadavers. It's no better here in Ghana. It's worse, I'm telling you. I want to leave. But where will you go, I asked, somewhat exasperated. All this ceaseless wandering, my own, theirs, all this self-conscious navigation was getting exhausting. We're too old and too broke to retire anywhere else, John huffed, sitting on the couch with his plate balanced on his bony knees. The dog sat at his feet, his tail swishing the floor. We talked about Belize and Tobago, Mary Ellen parried, recalling their gypsy days. And I used to want to go to Cuba. She lowered herself next to John on the couch, and I sat opposite them. But to tell you the truth, now I just want to go home, Mary Ellen added. Some people view returns as a sign of failure, but me, I want to go back. You mean to Chicago, I asked? Well, for the last 20 years, I've had strong urgings tugging at me, saying, go home, but where was home? My wife waxes on and on like an amateur poet these days, John grumbled. He tucked a napkin under his chin and took a bite of his omelet. She got bit by that Obama bug. Please don't get her started. But she had started already. I didn't think home was Chicago anymore, she continued. I just had this longing. You been to the Slave Coast yet? John attempted to change the subject. No, I answered. I plan to. Mary Ellen kept talking as if John hadn't interrupted her monologue. This shapeless, persistent, intrusive longing. The coast is usually the first place people go, John said. At first we thought my parents would join us here in Ghana, but my daddy balked, Mary Ellen told me. He said, that's why I left South Carolina when I did. No indoor plumbing, no electricity. If I thought sharecropping was backwards, then why should I go to Africa? Do you two visit the castles anymore, I asked, trying to draw their two streams of conversation together. Please, scoffed John. Mary Ellen said, "After Daddy and Mother died, I realized how homeless I was. Wherever I went, I thought I'd be misplaced." I sensed she was stuck in the same note of this song, like a record needle skipping in place on scratched vinyl. John had either stopped listening or pretended not to hear. He had his own song of disappointment. "The last time we went to Cape Coast, we were cornered by beggar children," he spat. "I could have slapped them upside their nappy heads. They sent us away in chains, we came back in planes, and they're still hustling? They should be filthy rich from selling us into slavery." The hurt in John's voice held more heat than the last bite of eggs on his plate. What did he want from those children? Kinship, compassion, contrition, respect? And what did they see when they looked at him? An African, an American, a tourist, or as he put it, an ATM? "You see what the West reaped from all those years of bloody trade and human misery? The birth of capitalism," John shouted. "But what did the Africans earn for our souls? A bunch of beads and trinkets. And just look what that junk got them," John finished, defeated. "But just look where we are now," Mary Ellen announced. Her face shone with pride. "In all my life, I never thought I'd see the day." I knew she was referring to Obama. My neighbors of her generation all said the same thing on Election Day. I'd walked around Harlem photographing them with my friend Thomas, impervious to the November cold. Nobody wanted to be inside. There was a charge in the air. We felt it, a black president. The church ladies in their ankle-length furs and whimsical hats outside Abyssinian Baptist Church. The trumpeter trilling Battle Hymn of the Republic triple time on Speaker's Corner. The Vietnam vets sipping out of paper bags at the oblong base of the Adam Clayton Powell statue on 125th Street. The new Black Panthers in their dark sunglasses outside the Studio Museum. The old man hawking Obama buttons, essential oils, and shea butter across from the Apollo Theater. They all said the same thing. I never thought I'd see the day. They said it as if pinching themselves to be sure they weren't in a dream. But we were awake. This was happening in our country, in our lifetime. Swept up in that reverie, I bought an Obama button and pinned it to the shoulder strap of my bag, his face marking the spot where my right hand would go in the Pledge of Allegiance, the approximate region of my heart. Sure, he was unproven. He wasn't as radical as any of us wished, but he was a metaphor, and the metaphor mattered. I told the Rays about that night, how my boyfriend Victor and I watched the Poles come in at the shrine on Lenox Avenue, how packed it was, how at a certain point the proprietors stopped charging for drinks, turned off the volume on the TV and put on Bob Marley, how we all knew the lyrics, how we danced to Buffalo Soldier and couldn't stop laughing, how we ran outdoors when it was clear he'd won, and flocked down to 125th Street like it was the throbbing center of the universe, like we were the residue of a long-ago Garvey parade, how the folks danced on cars and rooftops, setting off firecrackers and shouting his name, Obama, which was verb, adjective, and noun, how the crowd of thousands hushed its riotous noise, how our upturned faces watched his acceptance speech on a jumbo screen outside the Harlem State Office building, how the ones who never thought they'd see the day openly cried tears of joy. "Oh, child, you've made me homesick," Mary Ellen marveled. "John, I told you we should have been there that night." John didn't answer. Somewhere in the middle of my story, he'd either passed out or fallen asleep. "We should have been in Chicago. We should have been right there with Obama and the people in Grant Park," Mary Ellen sighed. I'd chosen not to mention the woman standing directly behind us in the crowd who had said, "Let's not forget he's got a white mother, people. Now, if we can get it together to elect a brother with 2 black parents, we can form a truly black nation." Because at the time, she'd struck me as a spoilsport, and I didn't think the nation she imagined would embrace me as a citizen any more than Ghana had embraced Mary Ellen and John Ray. "Well, it was a great day in Harlem," I said, "but maybe I'm being overly sentimental." I admitted. I thought about the group of African Americans on my flight from JFK who knelt down to kiss the hot tarmac when we landed at Kotoka International Airport. I would have felt silly doing the same, but I understood the gesture. This trip wasn't a simple vacation for any of us. It was a vexed pilgrimage. Mary Ellen said, "You can't help it, Emily. You're obviously a romantic. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come. Ghana attracts a lot of dreamers, funny thing since this country is so inhospitable to dreams. She gathered the puppy in her lap and stroked his yellow back. When I came here, I suppose I was looking for family. I used to call myself African American. I don't call myself that anymore. What changed? I asked her. I realized I'm not African. 400 years away made me something else. I'm black, she said. I'll stop there.